Right. So again, welcome to December's Lunch and Learn webinar, and this presentation will be on the North Atlantic right whale. So right whales in peril, is extinction avoidable? And our speaker today will be Ms. Julie Albert, and she is the coordinator for the North Atlantic Right Whale Conservation Program. And she first got involved with whales when she saw them in the wild for the first time at age 15. And she got very passionate about whale conservation after that. She has coordinated the Marine Resources Council Right Whale Conservation Program for 22 years. I think my internet connection might be going out, so. Yeah, it looks like, oh, here we go, we're back, yes. She's coordinated the MRC's Right Whale Conservation Program for 22 years and has recently become involved in furthering the use of ropeless fishing gear technology by pot and trap fishermen. Julie enjoys teaching the public about how we can be better stewards of our ocean environment and its inhabitants, and always leaves the beach better than she found it. So I'm going to mute my video. And all right, Julie, you should be good to go.
Okay. How are we looking over there? Good. Okay, thanks for joining us, everybody. I took a look through the attendee list. Uh-oh. Okay, Nicole says we're good. It was questionable there for a second. So it's nice to see a lot of familiar names on our attendee list. So thanks for joining us. I want to warn you ahead of time, this is going to be kind of a depressing talk. There are probably more pictures of dead and injured whales in this presentation than there are live and happy whales. So I just wanted to give you a heads up ahead of time. That's really the reality of the situation that North Atlantic right whales are in right now. And we're going to talk about that today. So the big question here is whether or not extinction is avoidable for this population. Well, that's what I was wondering. All right, hang on a sec, guys. Oh, there we are. That's why I wanted to make sure we were there. Okay, so for those of you who don't know a whole lot about the plight of North Atlantic right whales, we're looking at a population size of only about 356 individuals. That's alarmingly low, but we have been there before. We have rebounded a little bit. Hopefully we can do that again. It looks like we've got about 85 breeding females in that population, which really isn't very many. It was recently around 95, so that number is going down. About 85% of the population has scars from human interactions, mostly fishing gear entanglements. And of the live whales that we know of right now, only about 38.2% of the population is female. So for a population trying to make a comeback from the brink of extinction, having only 38% of your population being female is definitely not good. These animals are not living out their natural lifespan. Even though we haven't been hunting them for 85 years commercially, we are still essentially hunting them accidentally. As of right now, their predicted biological extinction is the year 2040. Now, we've all heard about extinction being when there aren't any more individuals of a species left, and biological extinction is when there are still going to be some right whales out there, but they're not going to be able to reproduce. So the turning point for these whales as far as heading towards extinction and not being able to rebound is something that we could see in our lifetime. So just a little background information on these whales. They were hunted longer than any other whale species out there for about 1,000 years. They were brought closer to extinction than any other whale species. They've got a very low birth rate. In fact, in 2018, we had 0 calves born to the population. They've got very long calving intervals. That means for an individual reproductively active female, there is a long time between giving birth to one calf and then giving birth to a subsequent calf. There's also a very high death rate, which is due to anthropogenic effects, which is human-induced, and that's mostly fishing gear entanglements and vessel strikes. So all these things together, mainly the low birth rate and the high death rate, when you combine all these, that is a definite path to extinction. So here's a graph that the New England Aquarium put together that follows the size of the population from 1990 to 2017. And we can see for about 20 years, there was a steady growth of the population until we hit 2010 when it took a downward turn. And we've seen the population of North Atlantic right whales declining ever since. And this graph stops in 2017. I can tell you that in 2018 and 19 and 20, it continued to go down. This is another graph put together by the New England Aquarium on the comparison between calves that were born versus the number of females that could have given birth. These are reproductively active females or females who were old enough to give birth for the first time. And you can tell that we definitely were not seeing nearly as many calves as we could have. Another great start to a season, something we didn't expect this year, is the 2021 calving season, and our first calf of the year was recently found dead off Cape Lookout National Seashore in North Carolina. This was on November 20th. It was a male that we think probably died during birth. No human interaction was evident. There's no reason to believe that there was any sort of vessel strike or fishing gear entanglement. So they're assuming right now this was a natural death. And they did collect samples for genetic analysis so we can try and figure out who the mother is, because that's going to be very important to learn and understand and try and figure out how it affects the reproductive behavior. So not a good way to start the season. So hopefully it's not a predictor for what's going to happen the next few months. So why should we care about whether or not right whales are out there to begin with? I've had this question a lot, and the biggest answer I think is if you like to breathe, you should probably care that right whales are around. They actually curb climate change better than just about any animals out there. They capture carbon dioxide and support phytoplankton growth, which stores about 40% of all the carbon produced on the planet. So even just a 1% increase in phytoplankton activity is equivalent to 2 billion mature trees. And we all think about trees fighting climate change because they take in carbon dioxide and they give us oxygen. A lot of people don't realize that the oceans hold 50 times more CO2 than the atmosphere does, and whales have a lot to do with that. A single whale can capture 33 tons of carbon dioxide on average when it dies and sinks to the ocean floor. And the International Monetary Fund has actually put a value of more than $2 million on every great whale out there, not just because it supports the fishing industry, but also because of the whale watch industry. So the biggest threats for North Atlantic right whales are entanglements in fishing gear and vessel strikes. These next few slides, I'm kind of going to let the pictures speak for themselves. The entanglements are not pretty. It is a huge problem, and like I said, more than 80% of the population bears scars from entanglements, and it's because of things like this. This picture on the left shows a whale that's facing away from us and the tail flukes are underwater. You can see a rope wrapped around the base of the tail where it meets the body, and all of the skin has been rubbed off. So that's got to hurt. You know, these animals end up with lesions, they get infected. A lot of times it makes it hard to eat. They might be dragging traps and gear with them, so it's hard to swim. It usually ends up being a very slow and painful death for these animals. And it's very widespread and a big problem. On the right is an aerial view of a right whale that's entangled. A lot of times they trail line pretty far back behind their body, so that rope that rubs over their tail causes a lot of injuries. This is a picture of a whale named Kingfisher. He was found entangled back in 2003 when he was only a year old. And he was very severely entangled, and for more than a decade, he had gotten out of most of it, but still had these wraps around his right flipper. And because of this entanglement, his flipper was disfigured and it kind of grew around it. So these are the things that right whales are facing right now. Here's a right whale that was entangled up in Canada a few summers ago. This whale is facing us, and you can see there's a float tied onto this rope that he's dragging. There's a buoy on his left side. The ropes are twisted together. They get entangled in the baleen, and it makes it hard for these animals to feed. Normally, the baleen in their mouth hangs from the upper jaw straight down, but in this photo, you can see that the ropes are causing the baleen to bend in half and upwards, and it's sticking out of the whale's mouth. Definitely makes it hard to feed. A lot of times entangled whales end up getting emaciated and starve to death, or they end up with infections and die from septicemia. Well, then vessel strikes are also a big problem. This picture shows quite a few propeller cuts on a young right whale that was killed by a ship. And a few more pictures have an aerial view of a right whale with propeller cuts across its back. This picture on the right is a whale named Radiator. This was a whale that was vessel struck, but it did survive its injuries. It healed over, but the lasting effects of these injuries do play into their socialization, their reproductive behavior, their feeding, how well they can swim. So what our goal has been for vessel strikes is to try and reduce them as much as possible and make sure that any interactions between vessels and whales don't actually cause the whale to die. Here's a right whale named Clipper. Clipper got her name because she actually had one of her tail flukes clipped off by a vessel strike. That healed over, and she did go on to live for many more years, and she did give birth to calves, but she's no longer with us. This is actually the whale that entered Sebastian Inlet in 2016. So she was the survivor of a vessel strike as well. This is a calf that was born last season. This was one of our vessel struck animals. This was literally an animal that was only a few days old, and a propeller, it is believed, cut this whale across the top of its head and caused that flap of skin and soft tissue to actually peel up and off the skull, and it actually exposed bone. So it's believed that this whale is also dead. So what's being done about all these problems? Over the years, we've had vessel strike issues that have been addressed through shifts in shipping lanes. This map on the right shows an original shipping lane and then the shift that was made to an area where there weren't as many right whale sightings over the course of a 20-year period. So they overlaid those sightings with the shipping lanes to try and figure out where they could move the shipping lane to so there would be less of a risk to right whales. So things like that actually work. Reduced vessel speeds have worked in areas where right whales are known to congregate in their critical habitat areas. Any ship over 300 gross tons and 65 feet long is required to slow to 10 knots or fewer when right whales are in the area. Back in the mid-90s, a 500-yard approach law was established, requiring any vessels or people, any beach-going folks to keep their distance from white whales. As far as entanglements go, right now they're working on reduced breaking strength ropes in commercial fishing gear. There's a way to actually put what, for lack of a better description, is weak links in the ropes so that they can break more easily if an adult whale gets entangled. Unfortunately, it's kind of a band-aid to the big problem. We want to prevent entanglements in the first place. This is also not a fail-safe way to make sure calves can get out of it. As far as we know, they're not strong enough. So these weak links don't do a whole lot for young animals. That's why we're trying to work with ropeless fishing gear. This is the talk of the right whale world right now. There are a lot of people who are working really hard to understand all the various technologies out there with the ropeless gear. There are several manufacturers working on gear that will allow us to bring the vertical lines that help the fishermen identify their traps down to the ocean floor and store those vertical ropes with the traps rather than have them sit in the water column for days or weeks, posing a risk to right whales. There's also fishery closures, which have happened and will probably continue to happen. They take place seasonally. During right whale season down here, we're looking at fishery closures in the winter time, and in the Northeast, there are fishery closures in the summertime. So that is taking place, but they are likely to be expanded in the near future. So we're trying to prepare fishermen for that. Companies like Sustainable Seas Technology is working to not only understand and trial all the gear that's out there, but actually teach fishermen how to use it. So we've got that going on. And then there are also seasonal management areas and dynamic management areas, which go along with the reduced vessel speeds and fishery closures during certain times of year. The dynamic management areas are established when right whales are spotted in an area where they're not really expected to be seen. So they can say, hey, you know what, we had a congregation of right whales here, so in this area, we're going to slow ships down to 10 knots for the next 10 days or 14 days or however long they want to do it. Another thing that's being done is passive acoustic monitoring, where they actually have buoys anchored offshore listening for right whales. They're trying to record their sounds, so even though there aren't necessarily people out there watching for the whales, if they're vocalizing and we know that they're there, we can put protections in the area so that they're less likely to have human interactions. A lot of people have asked whether or not what we're doing is enough. This was an article that came out that Oceana put together that said they found that the largest container ship ever to visit the east coast of the United States sped through waters in a critical habitat for North Atlantic right whales. This was from Nova Scotia to New Jersey, which covers a good amount of territory. This was a voluntary slow zone, which, you know, if there are ships out there who are being asked to do things voluntarily, they might not always do it. So the question has become, is voluntary speed restrictions enough, or do we need to make them mandatory? And if so, where? So I was asked a question by one of our attendees prior to me putting this presentation together, and he asked what really needs to be done in order to turn this population away from a course to extinction. And his questions were, what needs to be done ideally, radically, and realistically? So to me, ideally, in a perfect world where money doesn't matter and supporting your families doesn't matter and being able to shop overseas doesn't matter, like, if we want to stop killing right whales, we would just need to end fishing and shipping altogether. And everybody knows that is not going to happen. As far as making radical changes, if we can't end fishing and shipping, then it would be nice if we could have immediate international fishing closures and mandatory speed restrictions throughout the right whale's migratory path, which is basically the entire east coast of North America. The problem is immediate action doesn't happen. Things going through the federal government takes time and it tends to be very slow. And anything mandatory is going to have a lot of kickback from the stakeholders. The shipping industry is not going to be happy about that, and we really want to work with people rather than against them. So from a realistic standpoint, if we could continue with time area closures where it's only at certain times of the year and certain places where right whales are expected to be, that seems reasonable. There are fishermen who are working to phase out their use of vertical ropes even at 50% at this point, because they're only putting a vertical rope on one end of their trawls instead of both ends. They're working on incentives for fishermen to use ropeless gear. So if there are fisheries closures, they're considering letting fishermen go back into those areas if they're using whale-safe gear. So that would be nice to see. Mandatory ship speed restrictions, I think, are on the horizon, hopefully fairly soon, at least in certain places. And like I said, we want to do this all with the cooperation of fishermen and folks in the shipping industry, if at all possible. But I have seen the government tell the fishermen, you know, if we can't come up with compromises, then the government is just going to tell them what's going to happen. And we kind of don't want to see that either. So. Does anybody have questions so far, Nicole? Not yet. Okay, we're good. So some of these fishermen out there are not only doing disentanglement training to try and help rescue right whales if they get entangled, they're also doing on-water ropeless fishing gear trials. There are several fishermen out there who know that the type of gear that they use and the technological advances that have happened over the years have made it very difficult on any whale that gets entangled, and they want to be part of the solution. Things that have helped the fishing communities is stronger ropes, which helps them haul their traps and help prevent them from losing gear, but at the same time, it makes it virtually impossible for a whale to get out of if it's entangled. They realize that they need to be part of that solution, so that's nice. So when we talk about ropeless fishing, a lot of it is not truly ropeless, but essentially what they're doing is having their fishing vessel talk to their traps on the ocean floor and basically summoning them to come to the surface rather than leave vertical ropes in the water for days and weeks on end. So some devices might have rope wrapped around a spool that stays on the ocean floor with the trap. Some devices might have an inflatable bag on the top of the trap that once it inflates, it will raise the trap to the surface. So any of these quote unquote ropeless devices that can be used are better than leaving vertical ropes in the water column for whales to get entangled in. So back to the question of whether or not extinction is avoidable. Yes, I think it is. All these deaths that are happening to right whales have been caused by humans, which means we can be the solution as well. So I think in terms of turning this course towards extinction around, it is certainly possible for us to do that. I'm often asked what people can do themselves when they're not scientists, they're not conservationists, they're not researchers, they don't work for the government. Like, what can I do as an individual? And I think the biggest thing that has come out is being aware of where your products come from that you bring into your home. Shop local. Take a look at the tags on your clothing. Read the tags on your produce when you go to the grocery store. Hit your farmer's market instead. I was really surprised to find that a lot of fruit in the stores comes from Mexico or somewhere in South America or even Africa. So every time we're purchasing products from overseas, they have to travel on a container ship or some other kind of ship to get here. And every time we purchase those products, we're putting a vessel in the water and sending it across the ocean and putting whales at risk every time we do that. So that's one of the big things you can do. Be aware of where your seafood comes from. Ask at a restaurant, you know, is this locally caught or is it not? And we're going to be at a point where eventually, hopefully, there's going to be seafood that's marketed as whale safe, just like the tuna is marketed as dolphin safe. So that's something to watch out for too. Other things you can do is report whale sightings. MRC has a hotline number that's here on the screen. I'm going to leave this up for a sec. I don't typically work in the office, so if you need to reach me, I'm the only one that answers that phone number. So feel free to call me if you have any questions. But this is also where we take sighting information during the winter time. If anybody's on the beach and sees a whale, we ask people to report it. And my email's there too if you want to drop us an email. If you want to become a volunteer with our Whale Watch program, we do have training classes that we're going to be posting to our website soon. We're going to get a little more in depth on what to look for, how to tell right whales apart from other whales, what we do with the sighting information once you call us and let us know where the whales are. And another thing you can do is stay 500 yards away. This is a big one. This is actually a law. It is illegal to be within 500 yards of a North Atlantic right whale. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people on the beach that see one of these whales don't even know what species it is. So they have no idea how endangered it is, how far they're supposed to stay away. The law was put in place not just to protect the whales, but to protect people too. I have seen protective mothers tail slap the water trying to get people away and get them to keep their distance. So we don't want people getting hurt. We don't want whales getting bothered. This is a very important bonding period between the mothers and calves. So we want to make sure they're left alone and they're able to do what whales need to do. We're also going to need help distributing educational materials. If anyone wants to help get some little yellow cards with our hotline number out to community businesses, oceanfront condos, hotels, wherever you can think of putting them, libraries, we just need to get permission first. We've got those and our brochures, which have a little bit more information in them. They have pictures on physical characteristics to look for. If anybody is here, or even I can mail some. If you've got some places where you can distribute these on the East Coast of Florida, shoot us an email or give me a call and let me know. We can make arrangements for you to pick them up here at the Lagoon House, or I could even mail them to you if you'd like. We had our brochure updated this summer, so we've got plenty of those. This image on the right is actually a 3-foot by 4-foot metal sign that was posted all along the East Coast of the US. I've seen them as far north as Massachusetts. We're going to be duplicating this, hopefully. Great suggestion by Joel Cohen, thank you. We're gonna make some flyers and try and distribute these so people know what to look for, know how to report the sightings. And we'll probably make a PDF version of this. So if you want us to send it to you so you can print your own and distribute them, we can do that. Or feel free to come out with us and help us get those out there as well. Another thing you can do is contact Congressman for the Save Right Whales Act. This is something that's going through Congress right now. It's HR 1568, and SAVE stands for Scientific Assistance for Very Endangered Right Whales. It's a mouthful. It was introduced back in the spring of 2019 as, actually it was a bipartisan bill supported by both Democrats and Republicans. If it passes, it will authorize $50 million over a decade to work on innovative technologies to prevent entanglements and vessel strikes. And it also provides funding to track their food source. That's a big reason why a lot of them are getting injured, because they're moving with their food, and this takes them into areas where they don't have the protection that they have here in the US. So we're working really hard with the government in Canada to make sure right whales are protected up there as well. Other things you can do. Oh, stay in touch with us. You can become an MRC member by signing up through the website, and that'll give you access to our newsletter, The Marker, that will have right whale information in it during the season. Right Whale News is a quarterly newsletter that goes out to the scientific community. If you would like to register for that, you can do it on the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium website listed there. I'm a co-editor. I think Jim Haynes on the call. Thank you for putting so much time and effort into that newsletter. For those of you who would like to learn more about what the aerial survey teams do, what the status of the population is, what happens with federal funding, research papers that are coming out, things like that are all in Right Whale News. It's very interesting. So it's free. It's not just for the science community, so anyone can sign up to read that. Follow us on Facebook. We've got at least two Facebook pages at MRC. If you do a search, you'll find the Facebook page for MRC as a whole for the entire organization. And then there's also a page specific to the right whale program. So that's one of the ways we get the information out as quick as we can. A lot of organizations that share information with us also do it on Facebook. So it's really easy to just hit that share button and make sure the information goes out there. Like I said, attend a training class. I'm going to be giving the schedule to MRC to put on the website soon. So one of the cool things about this, if you go through the class and take the test, we teach you not only how to identify right whales from other whales and learn what you need to learn in order to be able to report sightings, but it also puts you on a call list to be notified of local sightings. Will hopefully get you out on the beach to watch the whales with us. I'd hate to see for people putting so much effort into protecting them and never seeing them. So whenever we can, we will notify you, and hopefully you can meet us on the beach and get to see them in person. Other measures, there is a whale alert app out there. If you're a boater or if you know any boaters, tell them about this app. It's a great way for people to be able to report whale sightings from offshore. It allows the documentation of their GPS location. You can take pictures of the whale, and all that information is sent to authorities once they get back into cell phone range. So it kind of goes into the cloud and sits there for a little bit. But that is a great app to have. And then I tell you, if anybody out there wants to get a Florida whale license plate, that would really support our program as well. Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute with Florida Atlantic University manages the money that comes into the state for the Protect Florida Whales specialty license plate. And for probably at least 15 years, they've been huge supporters of our right whale sighting network. And we probably wouldn't be here without them. So thank you very much to Harbor Branch. If my dad is on the call, I'm going to name drop. Thank you for getting a license plate, Dad. I did want to pay tribute to Harry Richter. We lost him in September this year. Harry and his wife started MRC's right whale program back in 1995 under the direction of Diane Peril, who was the executive director at Marine Resources Council at the time. And he was actually at my job interview 22 years ago and remained a staunch supporter of our program. He was a donor. He was always very up on the news, met me on the beach to see the whales, and was just like one of my biggest cheerleaders. So I just wanted to say we're going to miss Harry. He was 89. And of course, I wouldn't be here without our sponsors. Like I mentioned, the Protect Florida Whales specialty license plate. That's an excellent one. So thank you to Harbor Branch. Harry Richter and his matching funds from IBM were donated last year and are actually carrying over to this calving season. And same for the grant we got from Port Canaveral last year as well. So we've got a little funding to work on for this year. So that's all I've got. Tackle questions? Doesn't matter.
Right. Awesome, Julie. Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. We do have a few questions. The first are we do have some general questions, but I want you to touch quickly, since we just talked about it and you have your screen up, mention how and maybe why the Volunteer Sightings Network works. Hang on,
Okay, so how does our volunteer sighting network work? It was started by the Cocoa Beach Women's Club back in 1994 when they learned that right whales came so close to shore that they could be spotted from the beach. There were a bunch of people who lived in high-rise condominiums near Port Canaveral, and they could actually see the ships going in and out, and they could see the whales nearby. And they said, hey, you know what, if it helps for us to notify you when the whales are in the area, maybe that'll help you steer the ships around them. So they essentially started this network of people who were willing to watch for these whales and report sightings to Port Canaveral. And it just kind of grew from there. We have had as many as 800 people at a time on our volunteer list who are trained on what to look for, how to tell right whales from humpback whales and pilot whales. And what we do with the information once somebody reports a sighting is we go out to the beach and we document the whales. We can usually identify the individuals, which is important in migration history and understanding reproductive behavior. And then once we know it's a right whale, we actually notify all the ports and ships in the Southeast United States where these whales are and what direction they're heading, so they have an idea of where the whales are so they can steer clear of the area. So it works really well.
Excellent. Thank you. We do have another kind of general question. Oh, actually, Julie, would you mind flipping back to the screen where it shows the volunteer number? Yep. Okay, and so as you're doing that, we have kind of like a general, yes, as we do have a general question, which is, what is the range of the right whale on the East Coast, and where is the gathering place for birthing and mating of the whales? And where do you see the largest population? So it's a couple of questions, so let me know if you want me to repeat any of those.
Okay. The first question was, what is the range? So they're typically found from about central Florida all the way up to the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Canada, which is north of the Bay of Fundy. So they're actually covering most of the coastline in North America. Now, that doesn't mean the whales stop when Bastion Inlet. We have had whales go to South Florida and even around the peninsula and up into the Gulf. That actually happened last year with that, with one of our calves from the season. We had a mother take her calf into the Gulf of Mexico and was there for a while. We don't know what she was doing, but Yeah, their typical range is just the east coast of North America. Um, the whales that come down here to Florida represent a very small portion of the population. So even though this is where they come to give birth in the warm waters of the southeast US in the wintertime, the biggest congregations of them can be seen in the summer in the Bay of Fundy and up in New England in that area, because that's where they're feeding. So while not all the animals are giving birth to calves, they all still need to eat. And that's probably the most popular place where they're spotted.
Is that also where they are most common to mate?
Mating behavior has been seen in the Northeast. So yeah, I mean, I haven't seen any of that behavior down south, but as far as time of year, you know, sometimes they're mating places and times where they're not being observed. So I think there's still a little bit of a question as to when that happens. But yeah, they've observed mating behavior in the Northeast.
And where do you find like the largest amount, or where in Florida are you most likely to see a right whale, like along the coastline of Florida?
In Florida, you're in a good spot if you're probably, I would say, Daytona Beach northward. You've got more of a chance of seeing them. We're in Brevard County, south of Cape Canaveral, and the whales that do make it this far south are kind of few and far between. But there was, I think 2 seasons ago, we had multiple mothers uh, pass through the area. So there have been years when we might have a lot of sightings during a season, but it might be the same mother calf pair every time. Whereas I think 2 years ago, we had at least 4 different mothers come through here and continue to head south. So it was nice to see so many different animals.
Awesome. All right. So, um, we have an interesting question. Are there ever any like GPS tracking devices used on the whale? And do people try to aid in the removal of entanglements, or if you see a whale that's entangled, do you try to just completely keep your 500-yard distance?
Oh, that's loaded. Okay, the first question, are any of them tagged? Very few. The only animals that are typically tracked with a GPS device are the animals that are entangled, and the device is actually on the gear that they're trailing and not the whales themselves. And that's so we can locate them and try to disentangle the whales if there's a good weather window or if they're close to shore. There has been some experimentation on trying to come up with devices and try them out on whales and see how long they stay on. They haven't been very successful, and they're expensive and they fall off and they can't be recovered and used again. So they're working on it, but a lot of the tags that were meant for whales are meant to go on a dorsal fin, and the right whales don't have a dorsal fin on their back to attach a tag to. So that's why it's kind of challenging for this species. So they're working on it. As far as whether or not people go out and try and disentangle whales themselves, I've never seen it, but I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. There are professional disentanglement teams that are very highly trained to be out with these whales that are incredibly dangerous to deal with when they're entangled, when they're evasive, they just want you to get away from them. They're definitely not in a mood to be messed with, and they don't know that you're there to help them. All the professional disentanglers stay in the boat. Nobody ever gets in the water with them, just for safety purposes. And we don't encourage people to do it themselves. What we'd like to see is for people to report the sightings. If they can document it at all, we do actually like photos or videos to be taken of the entanglement so that the teams can make a plan on the best way to proceed as far as where to make cuts, when they can go out, how bad the entanglement is, whether or not the whale's in a fairly fatal situation, or if it could wait a little while. So we try and leave that up to the pros. Definitely don't want people to try and do that themselves.
All right. And so this kind of ties into the next thing. So even though we don't want people to help assist with the entanglements unless you're specifically trained in it, we do have training classes for right whale sightings. So Julie, if you could please repeat the info for the training classes or move your slides so that we can look at that again, that'd be fantastic. The training one? Use the one where you said you had training classes coming up soon? Oh, maybe it is becoming volunteer. But you did mention that you had trainings upcoming soon. Are those going to be in virtual or are those going to be in person?
I'm definitely willing to do either one. It depends on where I can find people to host a class. I know a lot of the places that I typically go to, like libraries, the Barrier Island Center is a place that I go to, the Marine Discovery Center. Places like that are doing a lot of virtual meetings these days. So if I can find people who want to do a socially distanced in-person talk with masks on or whatever people are comfortable with, I'm certainly willing to come out and talk to a crowd. I think a lot of our training classes are going to be virtual this year. So I think we're going to do it whatever way we can do it. But I think we're going to have maybe some far-reaching education going on with the virtual ones as well.
That'll be awesome, and maybe we'll get more attendance too with doing the virtual as well. So fingers crossed for either or and. um, so we had one more question, or so we have two more questions, and we should have time for both of them. The first one is, whatever happened to the calf of the mother that was here last winter, and I believe the calf was killed.
Oh, okay. So there were two calves from this past season that are likely dead at this point. One we know about. One of them was the mother was right whale 3560, who is the one that took her calf into the Gulf of Mexico last season. We actually saw her off the coast of Indian River County in February, and she had a very happy, healthy, active calf. And at 6 months old, that calf was found with two different series of propeller cuts in it. It was found dead, and it was struck not only by one vessel, but 2 weeks apart. So that was definitely a human-induced death. And like I said, these whales are not living long enough to get to reproductive age, which is one of the reasons why they're having such a hard time recovering. The other calf was the one that had the propeller cut across the top of the head. So even though the last time we saw it, it was alive, it was not expected to survive its injuries, and it hasn't been seen since.
So then that kind of ties into our last question, which is, what are the effects of COVID on the chances of right whales getting struck more often or less often, or what the impacts of COVID have been on the right whale population?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think the whales know there's a pandemic going on. um, I don't know how much the shipping industry has been affected by that. I'm sure it has been to some degree, and obviously, definitely the cruise ship industry. Um, they haven't been able to sail or do their cruises. But cruise ships are only, one category of vessels that we're talking about. I know it affected the research teams as far as being able to go out and conduct surveys. A lot of the research was downplayed during the summertime, and they were at bare minimum with airplanes and people who were available to go out. So we've been trying to do what we can. Now, as far as our volunteer sighting network, you know, we were able to finish up last season without really being affected before the quarantine hit and things like that. So our public education is being affected in a way where we can't go to festivals and do the outreach that we've been doing, but we're gonna go virtual and see how it goes. But as far as the whales go, I don't think they've been physically affected.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Julie. We are kind of towards the end of our time period. We did start a few minutes late, so I was actually typing this message out, but I'll just have you answer it live really quick. It'll kind of touch on something that you mentioned earlier. And the question is, with scalloping, there's a turtle excluder device to save the turtles. Is there something similar for saving the whales with using propulsion or enclosed pods or water jet propulsions for kind of fishing traps or propeller strikes?
I like that question too. I've had people say, you know, why can't we emit sounds from the bows of ships to scare whales away? Why don't fish finders pick up something as big as a whale? Things like that. The technology needs to catch up with the whales. One of the reasons is because the skin of right whales is basically the same temperature as the water, and their body heat is kept very internal. Their blubber is a foot thick, so things like that don't really show up on fish finders. And the acoustics of the water and vessels and different propellers that are used all play into what right whales can hear. So as far as emitting sounds, trying to scare whales away from ships and things like that, we really need a better understanding of what kind of noises they can hear before we can emit a noise that we know they're going to hear. So things like that haven't really worked so far, but there are a lot of people chattering about propeller cages that we would love to see vessels using. I definitely think it's a possibility for smaller recreational vessels to use, but I would love to see them start going on larger ships, tankers, container ships, things like that. I don't know how close to that we are or who is researching that, but I know people are talking about it.
And a follow-up on that, which is kind of an interesting idea, what about like something like a whale bumper, like a shock absorber on the bows of ships?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's a good idea. I don't know that anybody's thought of that. Um, I'm wondering how big of a bumper they would need. We're talking about whales that are 50 feet long and 50 tons. And when these ships are transiting, even at 10 knots, the force that's used to kill a whale is pretty great. So I don't know that anybody's ever explored that, but it's certainly a decent idea. I imagine it would take some thought in trying to develop one.
And I think one of the largest challenges of that too would be encouraging shipping vessels to add the bumper, because I know shipping vessels will spend millions of dollars on getting barnacles scraped off of their hulls. So that might be a little bit of a tough sell, but I really like the innovation, and it's definitely important to keep those ideas going, because you never know what idea might actually work and be the one to help save the North Atlantic right whales. Um, so we are running out of time. I don't want to hold anybody over too long. But thank you so much, Julie. That was a fantastic presentation. We greatly appreciate all the information you were able to share with us. And for those of you that either hopped on late or had to leave early, this will be recorded and it will be up on our website in a couple of days. And it will also be on our Facebook page as well.
Oh, just thanks for having me. It's always great to kick off whale season. Today's December 1st, so I'm geared up for the next 4 months to find a lot of fat, healthy calves out there, and hopefully this will be a better season than the last several have been. So thanks again.
Definitely hoping for it. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic day and stay safe out there.